Hello and welcome to European UFOs. My name is Sebastian, and if you like this episode, then please leave a review on your chosen platform. Any sharing and liking you do makes a huge difference to the algorithm and is very much appreciated. Also, if you want to support me in keeping the show ad-free for listeners, then please go to buymeacoffee.com. There, for less than the price of a coffee, you can really make a difference. The link to buymeacoffee.com is in the description. Sober, scientifically minded, and rigorous studies of UFOs are few and far between. Undoubtedly, there are many reasons for this. There is the notorious ambiguity of UFO data, perhaps best summarized by Major General John Samford's famous 1952 announcement that certain reports have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. Notably, there is also a tendency within certain circles of ufology to interpret data to serve personal goals, sometimes steeped in quasi-religious connotations. That is why Karl Svozil's recent book, UFOs, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, Observations, Explanations, and Speculations, is so important. It is a beacon of rationality cutting through the mist of dubious and often unfounded positions surrounding the subject. Karl Svozil, who is my guest today, is a highly accredited Austrian physicist who, prior to his recent retirement, was a professor at the Institute for Theoretical Physics of the Vienna Technical University. Throughout his career, he has been a visiting scholar at many top-class physics departments, including the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory of the University of California at Berkeley. Apart from his work in quantum theory and theoretical physics, Professor Svozil has also researched the UFO phenomenon, the results of which are published in his recent book, which we will discuss today. Hello, Professor Svozil. Great to have you on the show. How are you doing?
I'm fine, at least at the moment.
Perfect. Well, I heard that the weather in Austria is very nice at the moment. I can't say the same of Berlin, but that's sometimes how it just goes. Professor, you have an esteemed background in quantum physics, mathematical physics, and you've published a lot. Hundreds of papers in physics. You're an expert in your field. And one question I always ask my guests to begin with is, how did someone of your caliber get involved in UFO research?
Well, I have to say upfront that I'm not an experiencer. So if you meet people who allegedly have seen something that resembles a UFO, or have even experienced some contact of the third kind, as Heineck said, I'm not among this group. So I'm just an observer. And the second question is that, the second answer is that I really can't tell you why I'm interested. I can give you some rationalizations which are reasonable, I think if such objects exist, this would be of high importance for physics in general. Because, even if you don't know how they function, if you see them operating in a particular way, you get, to realize that these ways are possible physically, which brings us, closer to the search and the quest for these possibilities, because otherwise you would outrightly reject, let's say, anti-gravity or diminishing inertia or anything like that. So these are, of course, very highly speculative issues, but I believe it's like expectation value. The probability might not be very high, but if they exist, this is of great importance. So this is the rationalized answer. The more emotional answer is that I studied physics like many physicists, but they tell you in private. Some told me in private that they have utopian goals by pursuing physics, and they ended up doing standard standard physics because we have to deal with the physics of our time and not with science fiction. But their motivation primarily was science fiction. And my motivation to study physics was to enable humankind to reach out into space. So for me, this is one of the most important goals of physics, to enable humanity to go beyond the solar system, to develop propulsion techniques which are more elegant than today's propulsion techniques on fire, and to colonize or to reach out to the next solar systems and beyond that, which necessitates, in my opinion, faster than light travel. And faster than light travel is at the moment prohibited by various theories, including the special theory of relativity at the start, but also quantum mechanics. We have what Shimoni calls peaceful coexistence between quantum mechanics, entanglement, and special theory of relativity, and which is not prohibited by the general theory of relativity. But the general theory of relativity is very rich in its solution structure and can have various solutions that might be interpreted as not exceeding speed of light, but making shortcuts, things like wormholes and so on and so forth. So anyway, so I was really, if you ask me for the emotional component, I'm interested in anything that brings us further down the road to per asperat astra, to the stars.
Yeah, no, thank you. And we're here today to talk about your recent book, UFOs, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, Observations, Explanations, and Speculations. It's an extensive and meticulously researched book, but did you have any interest prior to that book in UFOs?
Well, I was always interested, For instance, when I was a student, I had, there was the Zentralbibliothek für Physik in Wien, and this had a librarian who became interested in UFOs, but he bought books that were of, in my opinion, scientifically low quality, and was not very well received by the other staff of the library, in my opinion, correctly. But when I was a visiting scholar at LBL and Lawrence Berkeley Lab and University of California in Berkeley, one of the first things I did was check out the Condon report, which was not available in Vienna at the time, but was available in the Berkeley Library. By the way, the most important books in Berkeley were all stolen out. So this was not considered important in the general community. So it was an advantage for me. And I still remember when I checked out this book. It was quite thick. Very interesting situation. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's how a lot of individuals in the field get started with UFOs. You pick up a book that opens up more questions than delivering answers, and that's how you basically get hooked. And speaking of the Condon report, I think it really speaks to the quality of your book that you provide a very sober assessment of the Condon report, because if you listen to popular ufological narratives about the Condon report, it's always cast in these extremely negative, one-sided terms, that it was kind of a political game right from the start, trying to deny UFOs. And that might be, probably is the case, but there's also a more nuanced side to it, which you bring out quite well in your book. And perhaps we can talk about this later, but you have this quote in your book where actually somewhere in the Condon report, it says that, we reached this conclusion, but, it's up for other scientists to have their own go at it. So I think that's very nice.
Yeah, I think if you read the Condon report in a scientifically balanced view, which I pretend to do, but there may be other people. It's just my opinion, it's not as devastating with regards to UFOs than it appears to be. Of course, the general impression I got when I first read the book, and I have to admit that I didn't go too deep into the case studies. So I did what everybody did. I read the executive summary, which was, I believe, written by Condon, or at least administered, written by Condon. He would not say that these phenomena are not interesting and deserve attention, scientific attention, but he would say it doesn't pose any threat to the national security or aerial security of the United States, which certainly is correct in a certain interpretation. The Condon report is like a Rosetta Stone almost in understanding how the state was reacting and how the scientific community was reacting. And it's a very lively thing. I think there is not a good documentary as yet published on that report, in particular with regards to the reception of the members of the committee. There is a very nice book, who unfortunately I have forgotten the author, but I quote it in my book. About a very personal experience by one of the helpers of Condon, and he seems to be very sincere and very, very much to the methodologically scientific point, and he's also ambivalent on the topic. So the Condon report is a very interesting document.
And I think ambivalence is a very apt keyword to talk about this phenomenon in general, and perhaps turning to your book, UFOs. In the preface of your book, you say that this might be a book about something that doesn't exist. So against that background, I find it super interesting, very impressive, and I, commend you on what you achieved to publish this extensive piece of scholarship with a very esteemed publishing house, namely Springer. And so how, just because I also have a background in academia, so could you just kind of take us through the journey of writing the manuscript, reaching out to Springer, and how that came about? Because I think it's a really, in my opinion, one can't overemphasize the significance this actually has for ufology in general.
Thank you. Well, at the moment, it doesn't look as if it's that significant on my end, because I don't receive any or hardly any reaction to it. But my publishing experience with Springer is a long one. I published long time ago. I published a book on quantum logic. And I'm also, as almost every scientist, I believe, nowadays is approached by publishing houses to dedicate a volume or a monography or articles for their publishing houses. And one of that was a previous book after quantum logic that concerns causality. And I think they trusted me from what I wrote about causality, of the causality book. They trusted me with writing with the UFO book. There was a question at one point And the UFO book was not initiated by Springer, but was initiated by myself. Yeah. But as I knew the editors, and as we both valued each other highly, I think they trusted me in starting this. I mean, although the editor at this point, if I interpret her correctly, still is very critical about UFOs and believes this is an illusion and a non-topic, but it documents her, how should I say, professionality that she would consider that, and finally let me publish the book. There was also a question, because I don't want to, I mean, it's always good to have money, but as a scientist, I'm very interested in open access. And my second book with Springer was open access. It was financed by the European Community, open access. And I remember discussions that I said I wanted this UFO book also open access. And we decided not to, because the publishing house said, well, this is a book that might be interesting for the general audience, and we rather have it non-open access. But so this was the only, I believe, serious question. I wanted open access, and they didn't. But I totally understand their objectives, and that's it. Yeah. I can only tell you very good things about my experiences with Springer.
Well, that's very good to know, and gives me a certain optimism that this topic will be approachable in the future by scientists like you. As I said earlier before we went live, I think the only other book I'm really aware of that was published in an esteemed publishing house is Pasulka's American Cosmic a few years ago. I think there are a few more coming, not necessarily from Pasulka, but from other researchers. I think there was recently one published in philosophy about UFOs, but I forgot both the title and the publishing house. But I think there is a change in academia.
Yeah, there is by a historian, a Gregian, who is rather critical on this subject. And because you can consider these phenomena also from a historical point of view. What is the reaction? Is this a stream of thoughts characteristic for the societies when we enter space? Of course, then space reflects back and say, well, maybe we have entered. We have been contacted, and so on and so forth. So one can do serious research which is uncontroversial in this. But my experience is it's a Nietzschean. I would say, as Nietzsche pointed out, classical tragedy was an amalgam, a merger of Apollo and Dionysos. And in science. Or if you put it in psychoanalytic terms, between neurosis and psychosis, I mean, in order to progress in science, you have to transgress boundaries, which I believe necessitates speculation and going beyond the canon, which sometimes might sound too weird, too speculative, and so on. But on the other hand, I think you still have to keep a firm standing on the fundamentals and the methodology. And this is, I think, you have to do it both, which makes it a little bit more complicated. But my experience is, if you are genuine and say that it's speculative, and if the speculation is interesting enough, you get things published, even in very high quality journals. May I just mention one of the things I was interested, because I was interested in the problems in field theory, which require renormalization and regularization, I became interested in measuring the dimension of space-time and fractal space-time and so on and so forth. And I joined forces with Anton Zeilinger, who later received the Nobel Prize for totally different issues. But we published a paper together about the dimension of space-time long time ago in Physref Letters, which is arguably the best paper, best physics journal that we have still, but of course we didn't say that this is it, but we just said, well, this is a speculation and this needs to be measured and so on and so forth. So I think if you do it diligently, you can publish almost every weird idea if you are not leaving the methodology of science. I even would go so far to say that physicists are really eager to transgress the current status of physics. Physicists are very open-minded, but of course, if you tell them weird stuff that they cannot verify, that's not enough. Sorry. Yeah,
but it's interesting because most guests I had on the podcast so far were actually physicists or mathematicians, and I have the suspicion that there is a keen interest in UFOs amongst that group of researchers, because what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis has, in a sense, no phenomenological or experiential part to it. I mean, it's so basically I think what mathematics and physics allows you to do is explore spaces that are beyond human experience, in a sense. And I think that's something that kind of then lends itself quite well to exploring speculative subjects like UFOs. So I think that's quite interesting, just in terms of how the scientific landscape is structured and what disciplines want to engage with UFOs.
Yeah, I mean, what makes the thing interesting for a physicist is that ultimately you increase the capacity to control the world, to program our universe. I mean, as Heinrich Hertz once mentioned in Principien der Mechanik, Principles of Mechanics in the foreword, he says that we are creating images, and the images may be formal, but we have to be aware that there has to be a relation between the images and the consequences of the images and the processes and the real world. And as it turned out, mathematics is, according there is a famous paper by Wigner, the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural sciences, but it turned out to be extremely effective from the historic perspective. And I mean, this is an open process. It still goes on, and this is certainly not the end of the story. So one has to understand one's position in physics, in my opinion, rather not as, let's say, bekenner of truth, of preacher of truth, but of a sincere person that takes in what has been there historically and imagines what could be the next progressive research program, according to Lakatos. But the contemporaries very rarely, or almost at no time, really aware of what will be a research program that's progressive. We are deep into philosophy of science here. The discussions that took place between Lakatos, Popper, Kuhn, and Feierabend. By the way, I was when I was in Berkeley, I also took the chance of listening to Feierabend. So I learned to know Feierabend personally. He gave a lecture in Berkeley, not very well visited, but very interesting indeed. He had also a position at the ETH. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Often it's a good sign if your lectures aren't visited. It means you're doing
Well,
something very well.
it's not a criterion, because most of the time the lectures that are badly visited are bad lectures.
There's certainly a correlation there, yes. How was your work on UFOs received by your colleagues in academia? Was there overall a positive response, neutral, negative? Would it be possible to say something about that in general? Or?
Well, my immediate colleagues, no response, because probably they don't know. And probably they also don't care, because they have their passions, in science, and this is good. And there are some who tolerate me. They know that I'm one of those. I'm rather an artsy physicist, So they know that I like to speculate a lot and say that I speculate. So there exist these artsy type physicists and those that are probably more neurotic and developing, according to Kuhn, those things, and both are necessary. Both are necessary. So I didn't expect a big reaction, and I'm not receiving that. So this is according to my expectation. But may I say, I mainly wrote the book for my own sake, because I wanted to study this phenomena, and it's quite entertaining also. And I also think that the value of the book is for those who are interested in a deeper scientific understanding, and those might not be very visible, but it might help others as I documented what I discovered. Probably even only discovered certain books, For instance, this book I mentioned previously on the Condon report, this report by a helping hand of Condon is interesting, who was neither pro nor contra UFOs and just gave his experiences. Or there is another book that I could highly recommend. It's by the adjutant, you would say in German. It's by he was part of the royal household, by Peter Horsley. Peter Horsley was working for Prince Philip, and he was investigating into UFOs. The British historically in the 50s, 60s had two groups working. One was from the parliament. This was the UFO Club, I believe it's called. And the other one was secretly investigation by the high aristocracy, and in particular Prince Philip. And he has a very nice chapter 10 of Sounds from Another Room. The other chapters are not relevant with regards to UFOs, but really also very interesting, because this must have been a very interesting individual and very reasonable and intelligent individual. And he wrote an entire chapter on the others, or the visitors. No, it's called, I think, the visitors. Yeah. And so on. So I think it was interesting for me, and I hope it's interesting for others. But whatever happens, I did it.
But if there were no negative repercussions, no bad reaction, and if it was relatively easy to publish it with an esteemed publishing house like Springer, would you suggest to other academics, particularly young ones, to go ahead and get your hands dirty with UFOs, or would you say, well, it might be a bit tricky? Because I'm also well aware that, you wrote this book towards the end of your career. What would you say to young scientists who are starting out in their career with a postdoc? Is it something you would get involved in at that point?
I recommend a two-tier strategy. I would not discourage anybody looking into the area, but don't base your career on that. So if you push me hard, I would say no, you should not go too deeply into that. You should, these are opportunity costs. You only have so much capacities available from time and from intellectual things. And it's like myself, I'm mainly interested now in quantum mechanics and quantum logics, and I'm still publishing, and I believe quite successfully publishing things in that area. So I recommend, because I fared well with this strategy, to look outside of the box, and beware that there exist things, but in order to have a career, you have to think of the following way. Physics is mainly financed by governments and by government bodies. I have been in such bodies. I call it Stalinist commissions. I have been in for some longer time, and I know how the dynamics is, and also I have to actually say that chances are very low that something substantial will come out of these efforts if you start on the green meadow, of the grünen Wiese. So I don't see. So in my opinion, as we see now, it's mainly government driven. How much the governments will release, and how much raw data you will get, let's say, from the military, and so on and so forth. And all of this is very restricted and not in your own possession. But on the other hand, it's perfectly reasonable to speculate if you are, let's say, in relativity theory on things inspired by, issues that may not be true. But sometimes even if these don't exist, if they lead through inspiration to other good things, you can publish them. And so be open, but for heaven's sakes, don't invest your whole career in UFOs. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, often strange things happen when you do that. I mean, you just have to look at what happened to ufologists from the 1980s and 1990s who do know nothing else but, UFOs. It's not a good sign. You need to have a broad horizon on things. So, yes. But turning to your book and getting a bit more into detail there, you, as a physicist, I would like to have a little thought experiment with you, because I think it's a good way of entering your book. Let's say someone, like a government institution or whatever, gave you a crashed flying saucer, and you had all money at your disposal. You could draw on different colleagues from different disciplines. What would you do with that piece of equipment? What would be your first thoughts, and what would you, as a physicist, try to do with it?
Well, the first principle I would apply to it: don't destroy it through techniques, applying it through techniques that might be available to myself, but would be destructive to these structures. Also, your question is a little bit incomplete, because most likely I would get access to this craft with a high level of clearance, which would require me to undersign a non-disclosure agreement, and actually, I'm not sure how I would react to that request, because at the moment, I'm totally free. I mean, you have to believe me that. I mean, you can say, well, I'm an agent doing kind of misinformation research, or I mean, at some point you have to trust me that I'm not misinforming you. And you may not trust me, which is totally legitimate. as I'm now, I can safely say that nobody has approached me with any kind of non-disclosure. There have been personal requests of people not to be engaged, and of course, I take this seriously as every reporter should do, I believe. But other than that, scientifically, so and then the question is also an interesting one. The sub question is, would you really would I really prefer being shown the craft and then being under the non-disclosure agreement type of regulation, which would satisfy my own quest? Yeah, or would I prefer to be not shown a craft and say whatever comes to my mind?
I actually understood the question a bit, or at least in my mind it was a bit different. So I was starting from the very idealistic position that,
but that will not happen.
We live in a world where this is no secret and where it's in the open domain, and you would have
no. This will not happen. This is out of question, because these issues, if they exist, are much too important to be discussed openly, according to those who are in power, I believe. But maybe this is probably a wild speculation. You could say that those are in power are the most open people, and they want everything to be known. But I think if you look into let's say previous handlings of technology, let's say paperclip and other things, it's to be expected that they will apply the same kind of secrecy that they have applied to things that are well documented now. For instance, after World War II, there was the question of how to exploit Nazi technology, and everybody who could, including Great Britain, USA, of course, is the most it's most well known. As I mentioned, Project Paperclip, but also the Soviets. They took whatever they got and tried to exploit it for their own purposes. But I don't think that this was very openly discussed.
Mm-hmm. Again, it was just a very idealistic thought experiment. But but so then let's turn to a more realistic scenario. Yep.
Well, if you under the assumption that everything is open, I could answer your question. I would be extremely careful with these objects. As I said before, because there are some structures that you don't even recognize as structures might be very relevant for further research and for the functioning of this organism, of this body. For instance, you can have this analogy, and Arthur C. Clarke has that, I think, and others. Also, let's say if you're confronted with a semiconductor device and give it to Newton, he wouldn't be able even to realize what kind of structures, information are stored in there, information processing capacities, and so on and so forth. So you might destroy, let's say, an alien database by just looking at it with let's say, with a CT scanner, or with an MRI scanner, or whatever we have at the moment. The other question is, this is a question that that occurred to us in another study in a totally unrelated area. How would you recognize supercomputing capacities? How would you recognize hypercomputation? You know, it's not that easy because in some sense you have to verify. Let's say if I give you a computer and say this is a hypercomputer and does what no present computer can do, it's how should I do it? And one of the techniques would be to start with asymmetric problems. That is problems that are easy to construct but difficult to deconstruct. And one of these issues is encryption, the RSA algorithm, or graph isomorphism. Let's say you have a graph and you distort it in a certain way, and then you present the original graph and the distorted graph and ask this alleged hypercomputer how to if it's isomorphic, because you know the answer, but it's at the moment, at least at the moment, it's difficult to compute with conventional computers. So this applies also to the issue. If you give me a graph, craft, would I believe you that this is an alien craft? You know, and the question of belief, you know, when would you believe something? Let's say anything, you know. Do you believe what the government tells you? You know that the government afterwards, governments often tell you, sorry, this is not the entire truth, or we even lied, you know, and they start wars with propaganda and so on. So it's not that easy. I mean, I'm not against government, you know, and sometimes I understand that they have to say because for instance, let's say if you, as Elizondo pointed out, if you or Mellon, if you tell it some things openly, you tell it also to your potential enemies, and these enemies have no qualms of exploiting this information you communicate to your public. So this is a very difficult issue. Also, one of my hypotheses developed in the book is a quantification of Arthur C. Clarke's conjecture that no advanced technology is recognizable by the relative ancient technologies, and we have to admit that our technologies is ancient relative to the other technologies, and very likely our experts will not be able to decipher and decrypt this technology. So one has to be aware of that, and which includes that if you ask a current scientist like myself, you know, what is it and how does it operate? This scientist will most likely satisfy his or her own objections. You know, I don't know how to express this in English. You might help me with the translation. It's called Bauchladen, you know. This, you know, he has a tray of things that he knows, or she, and tells you whatever she or he knows, you know, but very likely, according to Kuhn, this, if this goes, this is my speculation, beyond two scientific revolutions, which might be just, within 300 years, you know, this is totally, impossible to decipher.
But thanks a lot. I very much enjoyed your thoughts on this, because you know, for the general public, it's often not very transparent how scientists would approach this issue, and just getting insights into, you know, your stream of thought here, how you would approach this, is just very interesting. And yeah, there is this huge gap between whatever that technology may be in our current state of knowledge, techniques, etc.
Well, I would say be careful and mindful, but these are also null statements, you know, because yeah. I mean, allegedly, if the Americans have some craft collected, they just do that. They unpack them every 10 years or so and ask some experts, can you help us? And then pack them again and store them somewhere. But this is of course a wild speculation that has no basis in official statements.
Indeed, I think it was Bob Lazar who said something along those lines.
But I'm not supporting Bob Lazar, but it's a reasonable strategy, I would say.
Yeah. Turning to the government and it's well, mainly the U.S. government and its position towards UFOs. What is your general take on the most recent revelations? Well, I think 2017 marked a particular um, um, moment in the history of this topic. Where do you see all of this going? Because I'm just going to give you a short review of where I see it going. So I think on the one end of the spectrum, there's an increasing interest in academia, which kind of is partly fueled by a more widespread public engagement with this, going back to 2017. But at the same time, especially in the US, there is also kind of a splinter group within the higher echelons of the Pentagon dealing with this, but from a very interesting point of view, which is national security. I mean, this has always been an issue, but I think, especially if you look at what Elizondo is talking about, it often is against the background of national security. So this is kind of where I see all of this going. So you have one axis going in the area of national security, and the other one more kind of in an open science public debate kind of thing. Where do you think we are at the moment?
Yeah, just one remark. Elizondo, you quoted Elizondo. He's a counterintelligence. He's not intelligence. He's counterintelligence. So counterintelligence is something that creates perceptions or looks at perceptions of the enemy, rather than looks into the enemy. It's an interesting differentiation, maybe totally irrelevant for this topic. But I would, unlike most commentators, I would say that these 2017 articles in the New York Times were not revealing a huge government effort, but was at least was probably an effort of a group of people who are not in the known and try to become known. So the real program, in my opinion, might be. I'm just saying this is very speculative and highly controversial, but in my impression is that maybe there was starting from the late 40s of the last century, there was a splitting off of the real efforts, and this small group of half in the know people or in the know who want to drag this iceberg, the what's underwater, out of the water. Let's say Senator Harry Reid was one of them. He was part of the Gang of Eight at some point, so he probably knew much more than he could tell. But but they intended not to research into UFOs, but to research into UFOs. So it's a second degree kind of thing, and one has to probably evaluate those efforts, which submerged or got out of got into the public view in these New York Times articles and so on, as an indication that there was a group attempting to unearth the real thing, which might have started as a spin-off in the 1940s. And also, if one says, well, they have just wasted 22 million taxpayers' dollars. This is, I would like to quote Crash, but I said this long time before when I heard this, it's vaporware. It's vaporware for the American military. And I think also the public perception of what was the objective of this OSAP program and ATIP or whatever you call it was probably totally different from what most people see it today. Was not to look at the UFO case, but as I said, to look at the research program into UFOs, but also in particular probably was about Lockheed Martin trying to get rid of some of this craft stuff that they wanted to divert themselves, and for this they needed a vehicle, and the vehicle would be an unacknowledged USAP, which is a very special bigoted secret service vehicle. I mean. Yeah, so these are just speculations, but I would just point out that what appears to be a government effort in UFO research was not the government, because it was a very small group of people who pretended to investigate something, and was probably perceived by some groups of the government as not very helpful,
Yeah, indeed. And I think the public perception, thanks for pointing that out, is that, starting with NIDS, then up to OSAP, that they were indeed part of what is now called the program, which indeed they were not. They were
outsiders trying to get into. And
exactly,
and this is, I think, confirmed also by people like Karl Nell, who recently went forward. And this is exactly the issue of when do you believe something? For me, that tends towards the existence of such structures. As a believer, as a scientist, I cannot say anything. As a scientist, methodologically, I have to be very critical about these things. But as a person, I would say, if I listen to what people with the credibility of Karl Nell says recently, I think there is almost no doubt that this is the case. That there exists some crashed crafts, and we are just looking at them and so on, and visitations do exist and so on and so forth. But, also I wouldn't take this with a high confidence. I just say it's, from what I know, it's not unlikely. Yeah, it's not unlikely.
I mean, it's just another data point you have, and what you make of it is a different question. But I mean, it's the same. So I think there are different categories of evidence in ufology as with any other topic. Eyewitness account.
Yeah, a typical question that would probably be asked by a psychologist, or in particular psychoanalyst, would be, well, you believe in this. What do you make of it? What is the meaning for you personally? is this? And this is, I think, also a very pertinent question that everybody should ask. What does this mean for you? Because for me, as a physicist, it means almost nothing, because I have no access to these technologies. Nobody explains this to me. There is no Prometheus explaining this to me. I would very much like to know them, but for the time being, I'm kind of stuck and have to I can only advise to do good physics of our time, and have an open eye to that, and be not too shocked if things turn up occasionally.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But
yeah, and would you say, this kind of brings us back to the kind of history of science again a bit? I mean, would you say that the starting point of a scientific approach to UFOs is, are we starting from the position that, yes, this is a real phenomenon and now we're going to study it? Or is the starting position that we don't actually know what this is, let's actually see if there is something to it? Because these are, depending on where you start, you will ask different questions.
Well, from a scientific point of view, there cannot be any doubt that we need to acknowledge that this is not confirmed. We have to say that this is a speculation, and from there on, you have to evaluate what you are doing. So I would be on a very conservative. This sounds ridiculous because at the one point I tell you that it's highly likely from my personal point of view, but from this sounds ambivalent that I'm telling you contradicting. So, but as a scientist, let's say if I'm in a commission and the commission expects me to distribute taxpayers' money, I have to be conservative in the sense that I have to be aware that this money has to be wisely spent, in accordance with opportunity costs. So unfortunately, I can only say that as long as we don't get enough data, I mean, for instance, the problem starts with getting radar data, even degraded radar data. I was, for instance, the Austrian military didn't even respond to my official request. I'm now retired, but I was still active, did not even respond to my request to get some even degraded radar data on what NORAD calls uncategorized objects. I cannot, at the moment, I cannot UCT, I believe. I mean, so there exist these artifacts, they call it artifacts, and which are filtered out by algorithms, but you should be able to, from the raw data, to get some phenomenology behind that, some movement patterns and so on. Yeah.
I mean, I completely understand. So, I was at a conference, I think, when was it? Last month, actually. It was organized by Hakan Kayal in Würzburg, and it's very much framed from a kind of academic, physical point of view, but there were also some social scientists. I have a background in historical social science, and what I found interesting, but also quite disturbing, to be honest, is that that there are completely different starting positions to this topic, and this is why I just asked you, where do you start? Do you believe that the mission of physics is to actually prove that these things do exist, or do we already accept that they exist and now we study whatever may be available? Because what actually transpired at that conference is that most of the natural scientists there, which were predominantly physicists, had exactly your point of view, 100%. But then the social scientists had a very different perspective. For them, this was already real, perhaps not explicitly, but they were talking about social consequences of, and a consequence logically can only be there if something actually already exists. And they work
Not
sometimes.
necessarily, if you believe in
Yeah,
something.
but they were often quite explicit that in their ontology, this already is a reality of some sort.
Yeah, but this may be a wrong ontology. Which brings us back to the question: what do you believe? It's all epistemology in a certain sense. I'm not going so far as to foster the French. The French constructivists like Foucault or Derrida, but it's a construct, and you might say, well, for the sociologists, it makes no difference whether these objects exist physically or just in the mind of the population, in their imagination. By the way, let me just point out that this is UTC, it's uncorrelated targets, yeah, UCTs that is called with NORAD. Yeah, yeah. So there is a gap in the physical with the physicists and the sociologists. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But I believe that also the physicists, deep in their perception, deep in their personal minds, believe that there is some credence to these effects also. But they of course they are totally correct. To not let that influence their scientific standing, and this is a recipe that we have fared well with. These recipes, we have we don't believe in fairies any longer, and this has given us dignity in a certain sense. It probably took away the charm of society of narratives, but I think one should not throw the baby too early out with the bathwater. But I don't want to appear too conservative or too denial. I myself say we have to. It's as I said, it's Nietzsche who said you have to integrate both, and only in this integration comes the classical performance. The optimal performance of the intellect, in my opinion. Yeah.
Leaving this difficult sphere of epistemology and the history of science, let's come back to a couple of more concrete topics. If I could just pick your brains on this. So, crash retrievals, what do you make of the evidence as a whole? Credible, not credible? Should we pursue it?
Well, so far, there is no acknowledged crash retrieval, officially acknowledged. What does that mean? That somebody like the CIA or the American president or some power to be just states that there exist crafts officially. We might also not be in the position to tell the public this. I mean, because if these things are real, there's some other agents. You might call them the others that have also a saying on this. And you have to. I encourage the listeners to look into that issue in the shoes of these aliens, and this is very much thematized in this chapter of Peter Horsley. He met Janus, and Janus told him a position that might be an alien position, and which is very reasonable, and I totally understand. So we might not, so national security interests might not be the only criteria. We might be confronted with some totally different agents in this matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is, I think, one of your explanatory frameworks in the last part of your book as well, perhaps to which we can then turn. I just wanted to address one perhaps final issue, because and I'm glad to see it in your book actually, is abductions, because I think there has been a trend in ufology to kind of, put abductions into one can and then look at sightings from a different perspective, which is all completely fine. But I think if you, as you did, try to give a comprehensive overview over the field, you have to include abductions. And I thought you did that in a very diligent and good way. So what's your position on the abduction phenomenon?
Well, I probably should say that, as you might have found out already, I very much like psychoanalytic methods of looking at things. And at some point, I was in these circles also, and I think one should acknowledge that even if those abductions don't take place in the way they are claimed, let's say, with aliens involved, one should take care of these humans, of these clients, because those people are left alone. They have what John Mack said. They have received an ontological shock, which is close to post-traumatic stress disorders, and in most of the cases they are left alone. I really encourage the psychoanalytic or the psychology profession to look deeper into that phenomenon, regardless of whether aliens are involved or not. There exists a group of people who are heavily traumatized by their experiences. At least as far as I know, I'm not among this group, and you may also not be among this group, but I met people in this community which credibly documented that they are traumatized and they don't receive the help they deserve, irrespective, as I said, of alien involvement.
Yeah, I was actually on a conference in a couple of months ago where it was an academic conference, and the focus was on experiences and how they can be supported, mainly in Germany. And whilst there are a couple of institutes that do provide for this, there's a shocking absence of any sort of institutional support for people who often went through quite traumatic experiences, and not only talking about UFO encounters, but also, other paranormal things like poltergeists and so on. So for the people who experience these issues, they are very real, very visceral, and often, shocking. But if they go to, mainstream medical professional, they are encountered with a certain degree of skepticism and perhaps put on drugs. So it's, as you said, so that's why I really welcomed that chapter in your book. It's about providing an open space where these individuals can share their experiences. So.
I mean, this may also be due to the fact that the profession, who is already a little bit under strain, from the natural sciences, to be more, let's say, scientifically under quotes oriented. They have an anxiety to confront themselves with topics which have a woo factor. Even Freud, I think there was a discussion between Freud and Jung. Even Freud, whom I value very highly, I would call myself a Freudian, probably, a late Freudian. Some of the theories of Jung look a little bit suspicious. And by the way, it's an interesting anecdotal thing that Jung and Pauli, Pauli had because of some sexual problems, underwent psychoanalysis and was very open to psychoanalysis. They departed. Their ways departed at the topic of UFOs because C.G. Jung was very much into UFOs, and Pauli even engaged a radar person, professor from the, I believe, Technical University of Munich, who should convince Pauli that these are just aerial phenomena, like it's like inversions that get reflected in radar and so on and so forth. And Pauli didn't believe in that. So anyway, but the point really is that one should take the malady or the suffering of these people more seriously, and not. But who should do that? I mean, I think one should probably also claim or expect from the community to have a more open position on that, and probably they comply then not meaning not that they should accept that these UFOs exist, but should accept that these traumas exist and have to be investigated.
Indeed. Thanks for this. So having a look at the time, you've been very generous with your time, but by way of conclusion, could you give us the kind of summaries or your interpretive frameworks, models of what the UFO phenomenon is about? You list different scenarios at the end of your book, and I think they're all very pertinent and important. So could you give us an overview?
Well, I think this overview has been given already by Karl Nell. I would say personally, but not as a scientist. Personally, I would refer to the recent interview that Karl Nell gave. Well, if I interpret him correctly, and I may not, but I try to do that. He said, and this is also my general impression, that these visitations have taken have already a long history, probably longer than our own written history, and that recently there was probably a flurry of interest because with the nuclear age we discovered the nuclear fire. This might have, a nuclear explosion. This is a weird physical speculation that I maintain, not as a physicist, but as just as these nuclear explosions might transfer information probably with different speeds than the speed of light, that we are not aware of. If you bang a bell, there might be some electromagnetic effects that if you look at it from the purely acoustic perspective might not. This is a wrong analogy, but you understand what I mean. So with this discovery of nuclear fire, may have come renewed interest in these others to control us. In my opinion, what Karl Nell did not say, but in my opinion, if I look, sometimes I myself feel like an alien, and I think if I look at it from what I think is their perspective, we pose a threat to them, because if we would be able to go to them, they would be confronted with us. And I consider us not such a nice species. I am rather pessimistic about these effects that we might cause to them. And so they kind of want to control us and process us, and which means that they might have some contacts. I would even go so far as saying that there exists some rudimentary contacts between our powers that be, whatever that is, mostly governments, and them, but on a very elementary level. And there exist these crafts, yes. There exists 3 indications for me that this craft exists, which are all in line, I think. One is the Wilson memo, which I quote which is speculative and it's unconfirmed, of course. And the second one is what Grash said, and what Lakatsky said. There is a recent book, also co-authored by Lakatsky, that he has opened some craft. He was DIA. I think he's a very reasonable person. And also, what Karl Nell said, this tops it. Karl Nell basically, said that, yes, he confirmed everything. So relative to what Karl Nell said, this is a closed subject, But of course, relative to, it's like a mathematical theorem, relative to the assumptions, let's say, if I say 1 + 1 is 3, I have to tell you that within piano arithmetic, if you have mod 2 arithmetic, 1 + 1 is 0, So, so for me, I'm born, and in a sense, I experience myself as a person who want to understand, who really want to understand. This is my primary issue. And in order to understand, I have to be open, and I have to give probabilities to that. And in my opinion, the probabilities is quite high that we are visited. Probability is also quite high that this has no consequences for the common person, living in our societies, at least in the open. And they will kick the can down the road again. And this may not be their autonomous decision. There might be parties that really decide, that are not human, that really decide. In any case, at some point, I believe, I wrote a paper on metaphysics on that. At some point, we will encounter non-human intelligence created by us. Let's say in the form of a large language model or whatever, and this will cause also a final, how should I say, a final shock. There have been ontological shocks humankind have been confronted with. One of them was that we are not in the center of this universe. The other shock was that we descend from, or that there is an evolution of species. And the third shock was probably that many of our motivations or reactions are based on subconscious processes, and maybe we are up to one more so such discoveries, that we are not alone, either by developing on our own creations of computers, creations that make us believe that they are autonomously thinking and have consciousness, or non-human visitors, and maybe even, to put speculation to the much point, there's this Zuse, Welt am Draht, Fassbender speculation matrix, and that we may live in a computer-generated universe. I'm not saying that we do, but we kind of, from a historical perspective, we experience the succession of shocks that Lenk has this formulation, brought us out of ontological security, kicked us out of this position of ontological security, and we had to cope with that. And Mack, of course, a Harvard psychologist who very much believed into contacts and close contacts. He had this. He termed this thing ontological shock, based on the Lenk notion of ontological security. Because ontological shock is just the experience you have when you leave when you're kicked out of your ontological securities.
Which in a sense is also, but this perhaps takes us too far, but it's also the consequence of what philosophers have called the meaning crisis these days. So in the past, when you had a relatively rigid ontological framework, which happened to coincide with some form of religion, these phenomena could more easily be accommodated for, whereas these days we live in a largely secular world, which has lots of knowledge floating around, but no real ontological framework that's also based on the experiences of people that they can then make sense of. So I think that's also where part of the ontological shock arises from.
And nihilism,
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But Professor Svozil, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure talking with you about the science of UFOs and also dipping our toes into more speculative topics. Can I just ask you what's next on the agenda for you? Is there something you will pursue further now in your retirement, or was this a kind of finite statement on UFOs for you?
Well, as for now, I cannot go any further than that. I've published 2 additional articles which are very speculative, and I say they are speculative. I shouldn't say published. It's on a preprint, on archive, on interdimensionality, and on which goes back to our previous work with Seilinger on this, and the other one on anti-gravity. There is a very interesting history of anti-gravity research, which is an own topic, and which I've recently talked about with a colleague from Sweden, from Stockholm. He is also very interested in this anti-gravity research, which may be due to laypersons, but also the Air Force was interested in the 40s. So I have an open eye on that, and maybe something comes up. But basically, I think this is government driven. If the government, or if the legislative body of the United States, and I have no hopes for Russia and China, because they are two secretive societies. So it depends very much on what the Americans are releasing. I personally, let me just say, from a physical perspective, maybe I'm totally wrong, but I think what we should concentrate, or what needs to be clarified, is the role of inertia. Because inertia is equated in the general relativity theory with mass, and attraction, of course, if you have gravitation. And inertia is a phenomenon that is amazing. You almost believe, that they are telling you fairy tales in what, if you ask a physicist what mass is, there was another conference with a colleague from Germany, who was not into that. And I said, do you know what mass is? And he couldn't believe what I told him. Mass is mainly the mass. Do you know what mass is? If I ask you?
No, because I'm also, my mind isn't very mathematical. So
well, our perception of mass is that mainly our mass as massive bodies, comes from the gluonic field in the nucleus. So it's in the field, it's not in the particles. There's another mechanism called Higgs mechanism, but mainly it's in it's not even in the electromagnetic field, which I was very interested in previously. I have even asked Dirac. I once met Dirac. Dirac is a famous physicist. I also met, at this occasion, I met Wigner. But anyway, so the mass, so the tail, the narrative, the physical narrative now is that mass mainly comes from the gluons that are particles that characterize that are responsible for the strong interactions, which bind the nucleus together. Because if there would be an ensemble of protons by purely electrostatic forces, this will decay. But of course, the name says it already. It's in short distances, it's counterbalanced by the strong force which holds the nucleus together. And this is where the mass comes from. So I think, we should be aware that probably much of the motion characteristics of UFOs probably comes from the manipulation of inertia, but this is totally speculative, and so I keep an open eye on that. I don't expect to. What I'm now doing is I do what I can do best. This is quantum logic and quantum information theory and so on, but this is totally unrelated, and I keep that apart from and it's very satisfying and interesting as well. It's what the Germans call Denksportaufgabe,
Yes. So it's a mind sport activity indeed. Yeah. No, brilliant. Yeah. So we'll definitely keep an eye on what you are doing, both in your general field of interest, but also when it comes to ufologies. So, dear listeners, do please pick up a copy of UFOs, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, Observations, Explanations, and Speculations by Professor Karl Svozil. Was published with Springer in 2023. Yes. So, thanks a lot. It was very, very interesting today.
Thank you.